Hello, everybody. This is Professor Hamamoto, and it is November 2nd already, 2021, 3 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. I'm so pleased to be with you here today, and I'd like to welcome Detroit Dave Underdown. Yeah, okay, he's in here. He's in the chat room. Swan 432, Michael Charlie, welcome. Zoga Nostra Nostra, yes, Piper Fogel, and the gold color. And yes, Corky Goss is here as well. Welcome, everybody. Now, yeah, we had a great session this past Saturday for the Patreon group, and it was devoted to true crime. We didn't really talk about a lot of personal scary stories, but we talked about different types of experiences that we've had personally with crimes all over the country. It's a quite interesting discussion, and I'd like to continue it further. Maybe we can have another one at the end of the month. And today, of course, we're going to be talking about one of the most incredibly underreported and underrepresented, misrepresented, really, including today until the present day, true crime story of all, perhaps, and that's the assassination of Dag Hammarskjöld. And I'm going to use that pronunciation because it's more commonly known. I understand it's pronounced Hammarskjöld, but my Swedish is not so good. So, and I'll just use the conventional pronunciation. So today we're going to talk about, and this is the provocative thesis that I'm presenting for your consideration here today, and that is that there's a bookend assassination. We know about the assassination of our beloved President John F. Kennedy, right? The anniversary's coming up toward the end of this month, and there'll be the usual commemorative events and people bloviating about this, that, and the other about it, and a lot of it good, and most of it gratuitous by now. It's been decades, and we don't seem to be getting any closer to resolving the great crime that was committed in full view of not just the American public, but the world public. And this, ladies and gentlemen, I think is what distinguishes the assassinations of the modern media age with those of previous regimes. And indeed, the people who wield this power behind the scenes, we'll talk about some, well, they're the usual suspects, but there's some more players involved here, involved with the Doug Hammarskjöld assassination. But what's different is that they control the media from top to bottom. Even at this early date, we see there was a few loose ends here, but they controlled Life magazine. They're able to manipulate the Zapruder film and really re-edit it to suit their own purposes. The plot, the people who were responsible for the larger plot, right? And we saw that in the case of Life magazine. We saw the fake still photos of Lee Harvey Oswald, and the examples are many and many more. And we see the same situation here in a assassination that took place 2 years prior to the assassination of John F. Kennedy. This is the assassination of the Secretary General of the United Nations, Dag Hammarskjöld. And my argument is that between these two bookends, the United Nations was able to consolidate its power and to convince, because of the incredible crimes committed right on live television all over the world and endless replays of the assassination, right? It was an announcement to all the world leadership, and that's not just elected officials, people in government, but also corporate leaders, opinion leaders. It was an announcement that this is the new world order, right? We went through World War I, World War II. We've consolidated the power. Now we're going to restructure and reorder definitively the system, the world economic system, political economic system, in a way that will forever eliminate any challenges to our legitimacy, our meaning these hereditary monarchs, these hereditary families. You're familiar with their names. Most of you know, at least to some extent, their bloodlines that go back centuries, right? Some claim they go back to biblical times, right? They can trace their their lines all the way back to the Sumerian, the Babylonian kings, and perhaps even beyond. Right. That's outside the purview of today's talk, but it's important to speculate on those millennial bloodlines as well. So we're not going to be talking about the JFK assassination as an avocational type event. I know it's become a hobby for many people, and frankly, it's not just a waste of time, but it's sickening because it's become a sport. It's become a form of play. At best, it's intellectual masturbation, um, and I just don't want to participate in. I don't want to encourage it. And if that's what you're here for today, then you should go to some other channel, because I'm sure there's a lot of people who are going to be talking about these themes. No, my purpose today is to present a novel thesis, this idea of the Hammarskjöld, the dual. I think you have to consider them together, the assassinations of Hammarskjöld and Kennedy, to bring in the new world order system that we're living under today. See, the reason why I'm engaging what seems to be these old arguments is because we are very much living in the end game of what was announced publicly, globally, between the years 61 and 63. Television was still fairly new, and even I don't think the world was really linked up televisually at that point, but certainly the United States and the advanced capitalist countries like Britain were, for the most part, wired in by the early 60s. So that's the argument here. And I haven't really, correct me if I'm wrong, but I haven't heard that argument ever being made. Typically, the assassination of Hammarskjöld and John F. Kennedy are considered separately. Okay. We know, look at, I have not one, but two copies of, I think, the first full-length study of the Kennedy assassination by Mark Lane. Still one of the best in my estimation. I read almost all of them, I believe. Some of them outright cover-ups, like the Posner ones, and some sort of limited hangout types by, very well-respected journalist Dan Mulday. That's kind of a lukewarm one. It's just to name one person. But I have not one, but two. One is a first edition, 1966. Another one's a first edition, but a third printing. I was alive. I was a kid. I knew even less then than I know now when President Kennedy was assassinated. And I was a tyke when I heard my parents, typically my mother, because she was the news hound in the family. She was always watching the news and specials and talk shows. And perhaps that's where I got my fascination with chat shows or talk shows or discussion shows on television. We don't have very many these days that were of the substance that we were being treated to in the late 50s and through the 60s. Now it's mostly garbage. The View is not a legitimate talk show. It's just a hen party full of people who I don't know what they represent, and on and on and on, right? So we've had decades of research. We've had decades of futility. Supposedly, the illegitimate president Joe Biden is going to be releasing some documents from the Kennedy archive, and he's dragging his feet and everybody, please, Mr. President, please. You know what? I really don't care. It's not going to reveal anything. And this brings me to one of my secondary points is that don't wait for the government to produce any truth. Don't wait for any government. The whole idea of government secrecy, I mean, that phrase, government, that's a redundancy, isn't it? If you have government, you have secrecy. And I know there's talk about come on, let's grow up. We're not kids anymore. I'm trying to deal with reality here. The people who are in charge of this New World Order system are not very free with information, and they really enjoy, I think, the sport that we have undertaken, the sport of assassination, true crime, porn, if you want to call it that. It's almost like a pornographic thrill that people get from it, and I'm beginning to question my own interest in this area of endeavor, because again, it's just a lot of wankers who are chiming in on the Kennedy assassination, whoever else. Not to minimize the contributions of some really incredible investigators. I'll name one, for example, and they have an impact on contemporary events. One of them is Lisa Peace. She's maybe perhaps in your mind overexposed so far as the Kennedy assassination is concerned, but after a lifetime of research, she produced an incredible book on the assassination of Robert F. Kennedy, right? And she has gone so far as to take up the case of Sirhan Bishara Sirhan, who is the alleged killer of Kennedy. And there are any number of books questioning whether he was involved at all, let alone the sole assassin of Robert Kennedy. So I don't mean to denigrate the substantive researchers. What I want to see is that a lot of the wankers just kind of go off and find something else, find a different hobby, because you're cluttering up, but you're sucking the oxygen out of the room here. Now, there's a similar type of pleading that the wankers engage in that are involved with a UFO. It's very similar. That this whole idea of disclosure, government disclosure. Please, Mr. Government, tell us whether the Area 51 and the day after Roswell is for real. I gave a talk on, in conjunction with Art Bell. I think it was last week or the week before, perhaps. So we're not going to wait. And what's that guy's name? Who he's a medical doctor, emergency doctor. I forgot his name. You'll remember. I've seen tons of his material, but I'm blanking on his name because I don't want to. I'm tired of hearing this disclosure type of. It's fascinating. Yeah, great. Do it if you want to, but this is not that show. What I'm interested in is how the United States of America and the world got locked down over the past couple of years. I see the assassination of Dag Hammarskjöld and John F. Kennedy and many others to follow, not just in America, but throughout the entire world, as of a piece. That is the growing power and hegemony, the hegemonic control of the so-called United Nations, right? And one of the chief impediments to this hegemony that the backers of the United Nations, the backers are the hereditary families, the bloodlines, right? They intended to use, and they're still using, and they intend to use for the foreseeable future, the United Nations as their pass-through, as their cover, as their legitimate transnational or supranational body. Supposedly it's objective as a consequence. They're going to use the United Nations in order to carry out the New World Order agenda. And conveniently enough, Charles, who's the Prince of the United Kingdom, he's not the Prince of the world or the King of the world, even though he might have designs as such, but he was there talking about a military-like engagement of, I guess, us, the enemy, who are not going along with the so-called climate change war that's being waged on not just Americans, but people the world over. And again, they're running it through the United Nations right at this very moment. Jeff Bezos is there, the guy that was set up to be the figurehead of the retailer that ate the world. Bill Gates Jr., another figurehead that was set up in order to carry out the agenda. And even Leonardo DiCaprio, I'm sure he started out as a young boy as one of their mascots, if you get my meaning. He's there, but he's not chartering a private jet, I understand. I think he's going to go commercial. That's Leonardo. Oh my gosh, right? It's not going to end well for Leonardo DiCaprio. It's a matter of time. So, but anyway, we'll be reporting on his career in a future installment, in a future talk. Now, today I want to give focus in particular with a film it's offered on Netflix. I don't know if it's live streamed. I think it's live streamed on the retailer that ate the world. So they'll put anything on there, even if it's damaging to the New World Order. And the film is called, it's a documentary. Don't let that term documentary make your eyes glaze over. This is more interesting than any narrative or fiction film that you can imagine. It came out in 2019. The title of the film is Cold Case Dag Hammarskjöld. And it is done by a Danish, not Swedish, but a Danish journalist. Came out in 2019. I think it debuted at the Sundance Film Festival in Colorado, right? Or maybe some other, that was one of the major outlets for it. And it got fairly good reviews. I'm kind of mixed on it. I liked it at first, just the idea of a documentary, full-length documentary film devoted to Doug Hammarskjöld got me interested, and that's why I rented it so I could study it carefully. But I'm wondering if that film itself is not a limited hangout. For one, the director, the writer of the film itself is, I forgot his name, Mods something. He takes kind of a whimsical type of approach to the assassination that was off-putting to me. But more importantly, more substantively, he doesn't talk about other books, especially this one here. When in his film, this book came out in 2014, I think it was. It's still fairly new. And this is the definitive book on the Doug Hammarskjöld assassination, 2014. Yes, it's called Who Killed Hammarskjöld? And the subtitle is The UN, the Cold War, and White Supremacy in Africa, by Susan Williams. And ladies and gentlemen, here's an example of research. Here's an example of someone who did the hard work, right? Not the wankers who call themselves researchers because they went on Wikipedia and wrote down, cribbed some information on it. She did archival research. She's interviewed tons of people. We'll get back to her in a moment. But this guy Mods, whatever his name is, director of Cold Case, Hammarskjöld, doesn't even mention her that I can remember. Maybe he mentioned her in passing, but this is really the book here, and I'll get back to it in a moment. And there's another book. It came in more recently, so it's understandable that he didn't talk about this one. It's called The Golden Thread. It's by a guy named Ravi Somaya. And again, I think this is one of the books to kind of take the edge off this one here. I noticed that happens when a real hard-hitting book. By the way, this is Oxford University Press. This is not Create Space, Amazon. This is not a vanity press type deal. This is an academic. I think Oxford University Press is the oldest publisher in continuous existence. So they'll publish material like this. Doesn't really matter. It's not all sewn up, right? The censor. That's why we, at least I do, rely on books more than other types of media, because you can still get some semblance of truth and information there, but you got to work for it. This book here came out to follow this one, I think, again, to, take the edge off, but it's still very good if you're not familiar with the case. It starts off in a sort of a lyrical, flowery travelogue type to kind of suck you in type of style, which I said, oh my God, it's one of these books, creative nonfiction. No, but he gets into the hardcore stuff later on. So I will recommend this book as well. These are the only two full-length books that I know of that concerns the Doug Hammarskjöld assassination. So we're talking here, and of course, these two books don't go there. This is my contribution. My contribution is that the United Nations is an entity that's engaged in, probably from its very beginning, it's idealistic rhetoric notwithstanding, and I'll talk about how and when, and well, most of you probably know, but I'll just mention a couple of highlights there. But from the beginning, the United Nations was engaged in structural criminality. Structural criminality, you understand, between structural and ad hoc criminality. Ad hoc criminality is just sort of a kind of happens by accident. You get some bad apples, and they might engage in human trafficking of African peoples. That's a United Nations franchise, by the way. Sexual exploitation of women and children. That's the United Nations. Drugs, and you get some bad apples who do some arms trafficking under the auspices or under the nose of the United Nations, and then there's an investigation, and we didn't know. Oh my gosh, how awful! We'll correct that problem. Okay, that's ad hoc criminality. I'm saying the United Nations is a criminal organization on a structural level. It was always meant to be with a humanitarian gloss, and we're in 2021 now. We know about nonprofits, we know about non-governmental organizations, we know about private foundations or family foundations, and we know about public institutions like universities. We find out that as we near the end game here, all of them are structurally compromised. We happen to talk about religion, right? Pick your organized religion, and then you can apply that assumption of structural criminality right there. Civic organization, structural criminality. The justice system, structural criminality. So work that into your vocabulary, and eventually you'll begin to see it and understand it, instead of being a perpetual naif. And that's someone says, "Oh my gosh, I didn't know. Oh, what a shock! What a surprise!" It's that type of naivete, and it's not true all over the world. There are a lot of people outside the United States of America who are pretty hip. I mean, they're from traditional societies. Structural criminality there is their way of life, so they're not so surprised by this. On the other hand, they're resigned to it to a far greater degree that we are. At least we are trying to solve the problem, because we haven't been fully demoralized yet or taken out of the picture. We still have that unique Americana sense of justice and wanting to make it right. And I want to hang on to that. So I don't want to disparage people who are naive, but just kind of grow up a little bit, and let's face the facts of life, and we'll be able to achieve our objective, which is to minimize drastically, maybe, or just at least partially, to the point where most of us will survive the bio-Holocaust, right? If we can reduce structural criminality to a manageable, like, instead of just an exterminationist link, which is what they're talking about at the United Nations Climate Change Conference right at this very moment. Again, remember, I'm a person who values organized crime. I don't really, the mafia doesn't bother me. The American mafia, without the American mafia, there would be no jazz. There would be no rock and roll. There would be no popular. There would be no American cinema. All right. So let's get real. There would be no New York skyline without without organized crime. All right. So let's just grow up and live with that reality. Okay. Where we have a problem is that we have some psychopaths who've infiltrated organized crime, said, okay, great, let's destroy everybody on the planet. Right. They're beyond organized crime. These people are, they're of their father, the devil. That's all I can come up with, is that they are evil entities. They might not even be fully human, so far as I'm concerned, but that's a subject for another talk. So we know about the money laundering. We know about the biofascism versus via the World Health Organization. So talk about misnomers. World Health Organization, United Nations. I had a student many years ago who was very proud of the fact that she, in high school, she was a captain or a high muckety muck in Model United Nations in high school. And I had to break it to her. I said, hey, listen, man, that's just an organization in order to get all the children um, kind of on board with the New World Order, and talk about how the United Nations is going to bring world peace and going to make sure that everybody, man, women, and child, and all the animals and the forest are going to be taken care of. Oh yeah, taken care of, but not in the way that you imagine. And again, I don't want to make fun of people who have their naivete exploited. Excuse me a moment. But this is an illustration of the links to which organizations like the United Nations will go in order to manipulate public opinion, to manipulate children, people whose perception of the world has not, not fully been formed. All right. So we know, but not very many people know that the United Nations is also involved very heavily in the consciousness industry. And I borrow that phrase from a German poet, author, essayist. His name is Hans Magnus Enzensberger, is writing, and he's a leftist, by the way. So let's get over this left versus right. They're a libtard, they're a Marxist, they're a socialist, they're all these name calling. That's about as that's on the level of the people who engage in conspiracy porn. Okay, the name calling stuff. That's not analysis; it's name calling. So he's a leftist. Deal with it. He understands the consciousness industry better than any person on the right. Including Ben Shapiro or these people who've put them forward as being the conscience of America, right? These newly minted conservative type. Who else? Dan Bongino, that type of person, right? This is part of your conserva porn, let's call it. Excuse me. So let's give Enzensberger. He's 91 years old, I believe. He's among the last living writers who have a living memory of the Third Reich. He's been through that. He can see the patterns. He writes about it. So, I'm going to start reading. Not all his work is, enough of his work is translated in English, but I'm going to try to get a hold of it and revisit some of the work there. And of course, how is this funded? Taxation, right? Rent seeking in the guise of environmentalism. I don't need to go through the critique. You know that the climate change boondoggle, you remember Al Gore, right? The hockey puck, that crazy documentary that he came up with several years ago. Yeah, they're still running that game, and that's how they're going to fund the New World Order. And the Princess of Charles is going to be doing that, right? The guy who is related to the Central European bloodlines that go back to Drago, the dragon line, the dragon bloodline, Vlad the Impaler, right? The savior of Christendom against the Ottomans, right? That's his relative. You know that the United Nations itself has its origins as a military concept, right? Just like the World Health Organization, the National Institute of Health is in the United States is a military organization. It's an offshoot of the U.S. Army. Well, the United Nations, the concept was coined during World War II. And the United Nations were the allies, right? Britain, the United States, the Commonwealth countries, France, of course, allied against the Axis, Germany, Japan, Italy, primarily, right? So that was the United Nations. And there was a convening of interested parties during the war where this concept was workshopped. And then right toward the end of the Pacific Theater War, there was already victory in Europe, right? VE Day had come and gone. And now was VJ, Victory over Japan Day, had not even come when 20-something countries convened in San Francisco, California, about 100 miles away from me, 90 miles away from me. They got together in San Francisco. And by the way, if you go there, there's a memorial. It's this United Nations Plaza. Perhaps most of the people there are oblivious to the history of it and are oblivious to the fact that they are now, that they, meaning me too, are living under United Nations New World Order, centralized government with NATO as the enforcement arm. We're here. We're there. I mean, I don't know when they're going to really announce it that, the final curtain has dropped here. But anyway, it was they had a conference and a ratification ceremony in San Francisco. The following day, I don't know the exact number, but a number of other countries signed on. Today, there's, I think, about 193, close to 200 nations that are part of the UN. Now, in researching this talk here, I found out that as late as the early 60s, right around the time that Doug Hammarskjöld was murdered and followed by John F. Kennedy, even through the mid 60s, this is according to United Nations publications themselves that I was reading. It's good to look at the old archival material because that's it hasn't been rewritten. It's there. It's in its space and time. They were trying to address issues of importance to the United Nations, and the primary importance of the United Nations in the late 50s through 60s was the legitimacy of the United Nations. Because most of the American public did not really, because this is according to public opinion polls, by the way. Public opinion, right? Survey research. They really refined that through World War II, and they use it throughout the 50s, 60s, 70s, 89. And now, of course, they can call elections. They can run elections. They can dictate elections. It originally started out as public opinion. So they were doing these surveys, and I read them in preparing for today, saying that most of the public are either indifferent or not convinced that the United Nations is going to solve any problems of America or of the world. So it took a lot of money and many years of model United Nations, for example, getting the kiddies involved, right? Greta Thunberg of the Times saying, yes, we need the United Nations in order to bring world peace and equity to the poor, starving people of the world. And of course, the hidden agenda was to bring in world government, what we'll be calling the New World Order, right? Interestingly enough, it might have been about 3 or 4 weeks ago, maybe a month ago already. I talked about my colonel. I think his last rank was Colonel Michael Aquino, the guy that was the head of the Church of Set, right? You know him, the guy with the eyebrows. And his wife Lilith is her name, right? Lilith was the disobedient first wife of Adam, and then they swapped her out for Eva, right? But that's Lilith, right? Satanism all the way. Well, I mentioned that Colonel Aquino, I don't know if he was a colonel then, but he entered grad school, University of California, Santa Barbara, for a PhD, I think, in political science. And then he wrote up a dissertation, which became the concept paper to endorse the melding of the U.S. military with NATO, right? That's Aquino, and he's a Satanist. So we have a satanic organization there that was workshopped by Colonel Aquino at UC Santa Barbara. Why am I bringing it up now? Well, it just so happens that it was recently announced that the head architect of student housing at the University of California, Santa Barbara resigned because he did not want to sign off on a 4,500, that's 4,500 unit size mega dormitory that was going to be windowless. It's worse than your average jail cell. And he said, no, this is definitely some kind of strange, bizarre, psychological, behavioral experiment, and I don't want to have anything to do with it. So on your own, you can check out that article. UC Santa Barbara. There's some strange mojo going on at UC Santa. That's also where Elliot Rodger went on his killing spree. He killed about 3 Chinese students, nationals, and he killed at the other end of the spectrum 2 or 3 sorority members, right? Sorority girls. Subsequently, by the way, that sorority has gone out of business. So there's some strange restructuring going on in this beautiful campus that overlooks the Pacific Ocean, right? Just as an aside there. So we have NATO there. That's the enforcement arm of the United Nations. Now, I mentioned that I wanted to bring special focus. They might demonetize me. Hope they don't take this video down. I don't care about the monetization, but I want to play a short, about 1.5-minute clip from this documentary film just to kind of give you some visuals and some some visceral impact of what this assassination meant back in 1961 and what it should mean today in 2021. So let me zip my mouth for a moment and sit back and watch this clip from Cold Case of Dag Hammarskjöld 2019. The director, his name is Mads Brügge. Mads Brügge. It's a multinational production, Denmark, Norway, Sweden, and Belgium, 128 minutes. Okay, let's watch it.
We want to find out if Hammarskjöld was the victim of a conspiracy.
Okay.
It's the 17th of September 1961. Dag Hammarskjöld, the Secretary General of the United Nations, boards a plane in the capital of the Congo. These are the last recordings made of him because a few hours later, around midnight, he will be killed in a plane crash.
I know that I'm speaking for all my fellow Americans, expressing our deep sense of shock and loss in the untimely death of the Secretary General of the United Nations, Mr. Dag Hammarskjöld.
The death of Secretary General Dag Hammarskjöld reverberated around the world. Officially, the plane crashed because of pilot error, a simple misreading of the altimeter. The UN later made their own investigation, which was undecided between pilot error and a possible attempt to bring the plane down. But right from the beginning, there were rumors about a conspiracy to kill Dag Hammarskjöld.
Första tanken, om jag vågar säga vad man tänker, att han har blivit mördad.
Much has been forgotten and much has been lost in the passage of time. But the questions remain. Was Dag Hammarskjöld murdered? And if so, who killed him?
And then comes the most important detail. So a few days later you meet the exact same police officer in the
Correct.
streets. And you have a conversation which you choose to keep secret for a great many years.
Yes. And he said, oh, by the way, he said, did you hear about Hammarskjöld? I said, well, I believe he was dead or died or whatever. He said, oh, did you see him up close? I said, no, I did not. He said, well, between you and me, rumour, and I say rumour has it, he had the death card in his collar. So I said, the death card? I said, the ace of spades. He said, yes. I said, my goodness, what a coincidence sort of thing, By the way, he said, please, Norman, don't mention that to anyone. He said, after all, it's not released officially to anyone.
There you see, ladies and gentlemen, the so-called death card that was stuck in the collar of Dag Hammarskjöld. And there are no known photographs of Dag Hammarskjöld. He's on a stretcher here. This is when he's already being taken out. He's dead, of course. But there are no photographs of him in situ, that is, in the position he was found when he was, when the wreckage of this, it was a DC-6, when the wreckage was found. Now, the significance of the death card is that that's what the CIA death squads used during the Vietnam War. When they'd find an informant or some political opponent, their calling card was the ace of spades, and they would leave it on the body. Look it up. You can find information on that. That's the death card. So this indicates that there might have been CIA involvement. And according to this particular book, CIA, including the Dulles brothers, or Alan Dulles at least, most of you know who that is. I recognize the name, so very much know that history. And I thought that's an interesting comment by Thermosterville, says that just as Earl Warren's wife was related to the Hammarskjölds family, well, this is the Hammarskjöld, so I don't know if it's the same one or not. But if so, if they are the same family, that'd be really, curious. So let's remove that. That's from the documentary that you could see, I guess, streaming on jeffbezos.com or rent it from, I guess, Netflix. Same thing, really. Now, this particular documentary doesn't rely on this book so much Susan Williams, who's British, I believe, but it relies on the work of a Swedish investigator by the name of Göran Björkdahl, and he is in the film. He's featured quite prominently. Susan Williams is not. I don't know why, since this is the definitive biography here. Now, why is this of special relevance today under lockdown, under biomedical lockdown? Well, this is not me saying this. This is established documentary history, right? Well, it's relevant because Dag Hammarskjöld, as well as other concerned individuals, including President Kennedy, were not having any of this biowarfare technology being used on the Black African population. Yes, HIV/AIDS, what it later became called HIV/AIDS, was being deployed, and this is in this documentary here by Mads Brugger. There were these clinics that were set up to help the local poor native people to bring them medical care, right? Free, low-cost medical care, and they were being vaccinated, it's suspected, with HIV/AIDS, and that's what we're seeing, periodically, right? Including perhaps even today. I'm not going to say I want this video to stay up, right? But those of you who are in the chat room know about Dr. Mary's monkey, and you've studied the literature yourself, and you know that this is not, unless you're a newbie, this is not new information to you, and it seems perfectly plausible that a plot like that can be laid out there in Africa. And of course, this is a part of the world, if you know your history, and many of you do, where King Leopold II of Belgium, for 80 years, had that as a colony, as a personal fiefdom, and extracted enormous wealth. And the Congo was also, the Democratic Republic of Congo was where the Manhattan Project got its uranium from. They brought it there. And it's also a region that produces cobalt, and it's still a valuable resource there many decades later. So you can understand what was at stake here. So you've read your Dr. Mary's Monkey, Ed Haslam. You know emerging viruses. Leonard Horowitz has done incredible work in there. Do you know about the book by Edward Hooper? It's called The River: A Journey to the Source of HIV/AIDS, published by Little and Brown. This is not a Create Space book. It's Little and Brown, Boston, year 2000. You can't find that book, by the way. Well, actually, there's a new one. It's only PDF, but the original one is going for $500. You can't find it. But you can get an updated version. You can go to his website. I would recommend the Edward Hooper website for that. Should I tell you it's a free download, 2021 of this particular book, The River? Anyway, of special interest to me, this book is huge. It's thick. It's over 500 pages, maybe 600 pages. But of special interest to me was a facility for what they used to call feeble-minded children, not far from where I am at Sonoma Sonoma Developmental Center. It's called today. It used to be called the Sonoma State Home. And guess what, ladies and gentlemen? This is where children, mentally disabled children, as early as 1951-52, were being experimented with these types of concoctions. I won't use the V word, but you know how they're administered, right? Albert Sabin figured out how to administer them on a sugar cube, right? The polio vaccine, which I took, because I'm part of that generation. First, they came us with the needles, and they gave us the sugar cubes. But they were doing this to other children, mentally disabled ones, younger than me. I was not alive when they were doing this experimentation. And so Hooper, who's an incredible journalist of the first rank. Now, there's a research for you, Edward Hooper. Went to the home, talked to people, and talked to one of the doctors who was there. And just this goes to show you that these New World Order operatives do not care who they harm in the execution of their bio-fascist regime, now headed by the WHO/NATO/the United Nations. Because one of the doctors who was involved in the experimentation on these children in the early 50s himself had his own children vaccinated. And two of them, well, his wife came down with rubella during this, and then she gave birth to a deformed child who didn't live to see adulthood. And then they also had another child who was afflicted with hydrocephaly and had to, ironically, be housed at that same Sonoma State Hospital that her father worked at as an experimenter of the other children. So this is all in that book there that I recommend there. And it relates very much to the assassination of Doug Hammarskjöld, who wanted to see Swede by nationality, Swedish, okay? But he wanted to see Africa, the newly emerging post-colonial African nations after World War II, to develop along the lines of other countries. He wanted an end to the colonial process that had been put in by people like King Leopold II of Belgium. And he didn't want France, United States, and to a certain extent Germany, and of course Britain going in there to reimpose this colonial system. That's what Doug Hammarskjöld represented. Do you understand why he would be a target for assassination? President John F. Kennedy had a similar position. He wanted to see and he had his problems, I know, right? And I think a lot of the scandal and the smut that's been laid out about John F. Kennedy and his brothers and the family is primarily to put the scandal porn out there for us to efface the real contribution that John F. Kennedy made, and that was to see the developing post-colonial world, as it's called, the post-World War period, those nations to come up and be built up and develop along the lines that were beneficial to the people themselves and beneficial to everyday people like you and me in the so-called developed world, instead of being the personal fiefdoms of the Bonnie Prince Charles or these other hereditary. He's not the only one. I'm just using his name because he's in the news right now. He's come out of his hole for temporarily in order to announce the final throwdown so far as the New World Order system's concerned, right? But there's different families, hereditary families, and they're not all European. Some of them, one of them is Chinese, and there are a couple who are Japanese in ethnicity. And I don't think there are any Black African ones, and I don't know if there are any Arab ones, but they're not all quote unquote white people. So it's not like she says it's a white supremacy now. It's about bloodline supremacy, but she doesn't go there, and I'm not saying she should, because she has her own framework that she's working off here. Okay, another book that you might check out that reinforces my argument that the assassinations of Doug Hammarskjöld and John F. Kennedy were about bringing in the United Nations as the administrative center of the New World Order, is a book by a Martin Berger and a Chandra Gould, and the title of this book is Secrets and Lies. And here you go. The subtitle is Wouter Basson and South Africa's Chemical and Biological Warfare Program. Now, you said, okay, that's South Africa. I thought we were talking about the Democratic Republic of Congo, where the plane went down. Well, we're talking about a Southern Africa attempt by the world powers, primarily Britain, United States, probably France was involved to some degree, but definitely Britain and the U.S., the Anglo-American alliance in the southern part of Africa wanted to make sure that colonial system remained intact. And this particular book here by Susan Williams said that there was a project called Operation or Project Celeste, or Celeste, if you will, depending on how you want to pronounce it. And what happened is, and here's Here's the research for you. Here's the research. Okay. There was a woman by the name of, let's see, her name is Christelle Terre Blanche. What a wonderfully poetic name. Christelle Terre Blanche. She was a researcher for the South African Truth and Reconciliation Commission, headed by Archbishop Desmond Tutu. This is recently. This is 1998. But she found a trove of papers that talked about political assassinations by aircraft. That seems to be one of their favorite of the bad guys, one of their favorite modes of assassination, right? Airplane malfunction. So she found a tranche of papers like that, but she also found 12 documents that point to the assassination of Doug Hammarskjöld in this Operation Celeste, and they find the dark hand of guess who? Alan Dulles. So Corky Goss, you're in Ayape, Soganush, you know the history, but let me just read it so you know I'm not making it up. This is a must read right here. It says, according to this set of documents found by what's her name? Christelle Terre Blanche. We thank you, Christelle Terre Blanche. According to this set of documents, Alan Dulles, the director of the CIA, had promised full cooperation with Operation Celeste. This is that assassination plot against Doug Hammarskjöld that I alluded to, which had also agreed with MI5 and the Special Ops Executive. The reason for Hammarskjöld's planned removal, it says here in quotation marks, the reason for Hammarskjöld's planned removal was that he was, quote unquote, becoming troublesome. All right. The last in the series of documents reports on the outcome of the plot. Okay. Now, what's really good about this documentary by Mads? What's his name again? Mads. Come on, where are you? Right. Cold Case Hammarskjöld, right? Mads. I forgot your last name. But what's good about that particular documentary is that he goes at length into, and he interviews some of the principals. He tries to get information. He does get information from a couple of them, but he uncovers this shadowy South African organization. The acronym is SIMER. It's the South African, what does it stand for? Yeah, South African Institute for Maritime Research, right? It has one of those innocuous spook type names. It's the initials are SIMAR, SAIMR. Look that up. South African Institute for Maritime Research. And guess what their primary research focus was? Yes, ladies and gentlemen, HIV/AIDS. And they hired this one girl. And again, this is another example of how they just exploit, they burn people, naive people who want to help find the cure to AIDS. She was 13 years old. They brought her in, kind of like Judith Berry Baker, one of these wunderkinds, these child prodigies are good at science. They brought her in to do the experiments on AIDS, and then she disappeared, and her family wanted to find out what happened to her. So they launched an investigation, and it uncovered this shadow organization that linked together all these different figures who were involved in these biowarfare programs that were sponsored by the Anglo-American Alliance, which uses as its ultimate pass-through and its front organization as called the United Nations, right? It's not an accident that all the military personnel for the United Nations have been American military, Air Force, Army, a couple of admirals perhaps. It's very much an American, and the assistants or the administrative people are typically British. They might bring in an Italian or someone in the NATO ranks there, but it's primarily an Anglo-American operation here, even to this day. So we see here, ladies and gentlemen, how it lines up. We see how the polio crusade of the 1950s in America is related to this larger biowarfare program. And I'll leave it to your own genius to draw those connections with what's going on here in 2021 to us. This is how we can understand and and begin to craft a response to this incredible assault on the American and the world public in November 2021, going into the next year, 2021, because Bonnie Prince Charles is pulling out all the stops. It's the grand announcement here for the hammer is going to come down here. Now, would you think that the United Nations would be interested in getting to the bottom of the death of one of their secretary generals, Doug Hammarskjöld? No, not at all. I don't have time to show it. I had it queued up, but there's a spokesperson for the United Nations, right? This is 2017, who was announcing the results of an investigation of the Doug Hammarskjöld assassination. This is 2017. So you see that even though it took place in 61, the public, there's a certain segment of the public was interested enough to try to force the United Nations to come clean. And again, they didn't, just like the Kennedy assassination, the Committee on Presidential Assassination. Yes, no doubt there's an assassination, a conspiracy might have been involved, but we can't really definitively say that this went down as it did. So in other words, it's another whitewash. The Kennedy assassination, don't expect any revelations that coming up at the end of the month, and don't expect the United Nations to come clean. That's how I started today's talk. If it's government, it's some sort of entity, it's ipso facto, but by definition, it is going to be cloaked in secrecy. That, of course, leaves us, we citizen journalists, investigators, and those who are interested in survival further into the 21st century, instead of being eliminated as part of the massive depopulation scheme that was announced decades ago. Now, right, with the internet, the 5G, and all the different bioweapons that have been arrayed, and all the trial runs down in Black Africa. They've done it in parts of the Caribbean, and about the Middle Eastern SARS, right? They've workshopped this, and of course HIV/AIDS. They've workshopped, and they've got it down, and of course nanotechnology coming into play here. They think they've got it down where they can finally roll this out to bring the words that are inscribed in the Georgia Guidestones into reality. Whatever you think about them, the Georgia Guidestone and those words is really secondary to the fact that the announced concern under the guise of environmentalism with overpopulation is one of the top agendas of these so-called environmentalist groups, right? So there you go. There's even a name for it, named after Doug Hammarskjöld. It's called this is the United Nations, called the Hammarskjöld Commission, and you can find it open source. You can find the report. It was issued October 26, year 2013 in The Hague, right? And so it's very much with us here. Okay, by the way, again, a tribute to Susan Williams. It was because of this book that the United Nations, even though they ultimately produced a whitewash, it was because of the work of this researcher, Susan Williams, that the United Nations was forced to lie to the public. Now we have them on record for dissembling and for cover-up, thanks to this particular researcher. And I want to end that positive note, because people get depressed. They get discouraged. They get weary, right? Because nothing seems to happen as a result of all the hard work and dedication that you here have devoted to unveiling the truth. I'm saying, do not give up. Keep pursuing. There are tons of people who are also doing this work. I didn't know about Susan Williams myself until a couple of years ago. I only got around to buying the book a few months ago, and again, it's one of those deals. I could kick myself for not having read it earlier, but I'm sharing it with you. Now it's your turn to find out why we are going through this particular staged engineered crisis in 2021. It has a history. It has an endpoint, and it doesn't look good for us unless we understand the roots of it, the historical roots. through these assassinations and don't view them with our naivete and understanding them as one-off situation. They're not one-offs. I use the term structural corruption, structural, think structurally. Now, on that note, toward the end of this month, right, there's the assassination anniversary of John F. Kennedy, but it's also the re-release of Let It Be and Get Back, the documentary film on the Beatles' last days, right, by Peter Lord of the Rings Jackson, the New Zealand globalist filmmaker, right? He's gonna drop that film around the same time. So what, ladies and gentlemen, we can expect is that there's going to be a huge love bombing of my generation, the Beatles, with Get Back, and to cover up the Kennedy assassination, which is also part of my generational memory, right? Because they want to get rid of us. And we're going to be love bombed at the end of November. Then after the love will come the hate through December and early January of 2022, right? A love bomb and then the the bio bomb, perhaps. Who knows? That's what I'm thinking. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I thank you for your attention, and I will be revisiting the tragedy of Doug Hammarskjöld and John F. Kennedy through the entire month of November. In addition to, as I promised you earlier, dipping into the Beatles, right? And understanding the importance of that generational memory of the culture, because it's being attacked. It's being attacked by Dave, what's his name? Memories of Laurel Canyon. They started this a few years ago, right? This is an important pivotal time of history, cultural history, political history that must be understood, appreciated, acknowledged. You don't have to like it, but you have to understand it. It's not just being a bunch of hippies who just kind of got off on a self-indulgent jag. No, we're talking about people who are doing research and people who were studying or trying to find the truth through assassinations. People like Mark Lane, whatever problems that might be associated with his subsequent work. Well, let's leave that aside for a moment. The truth is that Rush to Judgment is a landmark text, and he's one of many, and there'll be many more. So join me next Thursday, ladies and gentlemen, for further adventures in cultural forensics. Thank you very much. This is Professor Hamamoto signing off for today. We'll see you soon. Thank you. Bye.